Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. I'm just going to talk through a few minutes here. I'm seeing the participants stacking up, so people are just coming into the meeting. We have a great webinar today hosted by Brittney McDonough, my partner here, and myself, and we're going to be chatting about in-house counsel compensation. We just put together the compensation report. I think everybody in here everybody attending has seen it. If you haven't, make sure you send us a note and we'll send you a PDF version or a link so that you can take a look at it. By the way, we appreciate everybody's efforts to make the comp report as comprehensive as possible. I know Averill and Mary were saying that we wound up having a record participation this year, which helps make the data. So we really do appreciate your input, and so do, by the way, all your peers and the CHROs and the other people that use this data to make sure that everyone stays competitive. So, and make a note of that word competitive. I'll be talking about how to position yourself with a competitive offer. It's a nice way to answer the question, what are your compensation demands? But this is also part of our GC Advantage program where we're constantly just trying to provide information to help everyone be a better strategic business partner and in-house counsel. You can visit on our website, the GC Advantage page, and take a look at some of the webinars that we've had. This and all of our webinars are recorded, and so you can play them back at your convenience. Actually, next month's webinar is going to be a dynamite program. We sent out, just like we do the comp report, we sent out a survey to CHROs, and I take it back. I'm jumping ahead of myself. This one is, if you happen to see, we wound up surveying board members on the interaction and the gap between what the board's expectations are and how the GC aligns with that. So that's coming up next month, June 24th. And then Q&A, Brittney and I want to make this as collaborative as we possibly can. So feel free to raise your hand, ask questions. We'll be scrolling down to look at the questions throughout the program. If we do miss something, feel free to reach out to us afterward. But we want to make this, just a good dialogue back and forth where we're going to be answering questions and providing some good tips that you can use to either when you're negotiating an offer or just looking for a raise in your department. All that said, like I said, my partner, Brittney McDonough, is joining me today. Brittney is hitting the ball out of the park. She's setting all records in our company, so which she deserves this the role that she has. In fact, I actually just spoke to someone who got promoted to general counsel who Brittney placed. And Brittney, I haven't even mentioned it to you, but she couldn't have been happier that you placed her in the process and how it's led to the GC promotion. So that said, I'm going to turn it over to Brittney to be the primary host, and I'm here for the duration to answer any questions.
All right, thanks, John. Good afternoon, everybody. So just to flash up the agenda here, we're going to go through a couple of the key takeaways from the compensation report. We're kind of selecting which graphs to share with you intentionally and selectively, and rather than going through all of the charts and all of the metrics, we thought the more interesting and productive conversation would be, what is this telling us? What is this saying about the legal market today? And how are you, as an in-house attorney, how can you best position yourself to be successful navigating this market? That's going to lead into how organizations are thinking about and somewhat redefining legal leadership today. We'll give some practical tips and pointers about how best to interview and position yourself. We'll talk through compensation and negotiation, and then how we think legal leaders will continue to be differentiated in the market. Okay, so starting with what we're seeing in the market, and I'll just speak kind of briefly to, I think, what these two graphs here are representing. So this first one, the median salary increase by position. One of the broader themes that consistently emerged through the compensation data was this distinction between functional legal contribution and enterprise level impact. So at the senior counsel level, we're seeing compensation remaining much more standardized and really tied more to functional contribution. When you get to the managing counsel level, this is where we see more operational leadership reflected. And then at the general counsel level, where we're seeing the biggest increase in median salaries over the past year, compensation becomes much more tied to enterprise impact. And we're going to spend a lot more time throughout today's session talking about what does enterprise leadership and enterprise impact mean as a general counsel, and how are um, companies really placing a premium on that. John, anything to comment on with these median salary increases before we talk about talent mobility?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we're in a crazy time. We're actually seeing demand at an all-time high, which doesn't surprise me because for us as an executive search firm, we're in high demand when the market's tight, meaning there's not a lot of people looking. One of the things we saw in our comp report was the majority of people saying they're probably not going to be looking for a new job. You see 42% here. So when that number increases, our business booms, right? Supply and demand. So right now, what we're looking for are, people are in a good position for the most part. They don't need something new. They really need that opportunity. We're definitely fighting the comp. The companies are being more frugal than I've seen them be in a long time. And negotiating that offer, that, like I say, this is something I think I want everyone to walk away with is some tips on that. But we are seeing that the compensation that people are looking to pay as you're moving is can be on the short side. I'm even seeing some notes here where people say I'm looking, but the opportunities aren't paying what I'm looking for. Again, you have to be a little bit more selective. There are great opportunities out there. But as companies go longer trying to struggle to find the right talent, they're not willing to compromise what they're looking for. I'm seeing the numbers slowly come up. So I think we're going to see an adjustment because as they hire these people at a higher price point, ultimately it's going to boost the people who don't make a move because their company's going to want to make sure that there's internal equity and keep everyone happy. But again, our business, like everyone's like, we're at capacity with position. As we fill them, we obviously bring more and more to the table, but it's right in line with this report. So not there really, I didn't see any surprises. People were asking what was the biggest surprise from the comp report, and I'm like, boy, this is right in line with the market that we're seeing.
Yeah, I think so too. And I mean, with seeing over 40% of candidates saying that they're not considering a job change right now, I think that says a lot about just the broader uncertainty in the market between economic uncertainty, geopolitical instability, regulatory change, right? Like compensation continues to be the primary driver or factor that candidates are considering when making a move, and that's reflected in the data. But I'm seeing in my searches every day candidates really more heavily scrutinizing opportunities than they were just a few years ago. And I mean, asking the right questions like, how do I know that this organization is stable? Do I trust the leadership team and vision? What happens if the market shifts further? Because obviously at the senior levels, especially, a bad move can have meaningful career consequences. So I'm just seeing candidates naturally becoming more selective and thoughtful, but I think it says a lot about just the current market and the amount of uncertainty that it's creating a bit more maybe risk aversion for candidates that have a good job today and are generally happy and content, maybe not as opportunistic or at least more selective when considering opportunities than they were a few years ago.
Yeah.
Let's with that gonna move to the next slide here. So the evolving general counsel role and really what differentiates legal leaders. Looking at this table, I think one of the most interesting things we're seeing in the data is how dramatically the comp range widens at the general counsel level. Obviously, part of that reflects company size and complexity, but I think it's reflecting something broader about the evolving expectations of the GC role and this idea that not all GC roles are being valued in the same way anymore. So, as organizations become larger and more complex, the market and employers seem to be placing a significant premium on GCs who are viewed as true enterprise leaders. So,
Yeah.
strategic advisors, business partners, operators, like these GCs who are capable of helping organizations navigate complexity and drive outcomes. So, it's like being this exceptional technical lawyer is no longer enough. Like you are seeing that the GC roles that pay the most are where that enterprise level leadership is really required, and we see that more in the larger, more complex organizations.
Yeah, I mean that does size things up. We always say the resume is what gets you to the table. It's what's not on the resume that gets you hired. Boy, the general counsel that are earning these kinds of numbers, they are just amazing. Where they know how to deal with crisis, they know how to influence others. They walk in a room and people want to listen. And I actually just had somebody, we had a very frustrating interview process, and the candidate vented the frustration on the interview and immediately was disqualified, of course. But anything you're doing on the interview or even in the job, if you're showing how you react or your emotions get out of check, it's not the right fit. Um, so we're preaching. We all became Hogan certified here because that EQ. I've talked about it for years. People are probably tired of hearing about it, but I just can't reinforce enough. I mean, you're looking at someone with high EQ, um, great listener, great relationship builder, calm and cool under pressure, very humble. They don't mind rolling up their sleeves and doing the work versus just managing others. And lastly, they're optimistic. See, what happens when you're optimistic is you always feel like you have a solution. You're very solutions driven. So you have that judgment that you need to put together a solution. And CEOs and boards love hearing, don't worry, I have this covered. So they know that the GC's under control. So any kind of and Brittany, I think you laid it out really well. Ability to lead and develop others. This just happened yesterday that a candidate thought they were a perfect fit. Brittany's working on the search for one of the top universities in the country. Probably is the top university in the country. And candidate goes, I'm perfectly qualified for that job. And I've done this and I've done this and I've done this and I've done this. And I go, I think that's great that you've done all that. Unfortunately, she's looking for someone who's led through all of that. And that leadership and ability to develop your successor is worth its weight in gold. So I'm just saying, if you're, we have our coaches that are out there and they're doing an amazing job in the satisfaction of those coaches, but coaches aren't teaching you how to be a lawyer. Coaches are teaching you how to deal and interact and impact and influence the organization and the people in that organization. And that's where the money comes from.
Yeah, and we talk about a lot about enterprise leadership in terms of strategic leadership. How are you showing up in the boardroom? How are you advising the ELT, right? And that's certainly part of it, and being able to be forward thinking and see around corners. We hear that constantly from our clients, but there also is this component of enterprise leadership that means being a strong leader of lawyers. And as John said, like part of that is really developing the bench beneath you. And we just had a search where the general counsel is retiring after 30 years and 30 years with the same organization, and there wasn't a clear internal successor, which kind of blew our mind, right? Like a significant leadership issue. Like what does that say about that person's were they intentional about building the bench beneath them? So a big part of how we are running the search to find the next general counsel, there's been a lot of emphasis on find out if this person is really a true effective leader of lawyers. And
Mhm.
we talk to candidates about not only how have you built teams, but how have you developed the talent? How have you created that bench strength? How do you manage performance? How do you elevate future leaders? Like some of the best GC candidates I'm talking to are ones who have been really intentional about giving their team exposure and visibility within the organization. So maybe rather than attending a board committee meeting on their own, they're sending their deputies there. So then when the time comes, like the board is comfortable, they have visibility and rapport with your number two. So it's, building the bench strength, giving visibility and development and stretch assignments for your team, and then also managing the performance of your team. I think a really good tip that I heard recently is to stop focusing time on the bottom 10% of your team and reallocate that time to developing the top 10% or your high potential team members, because the likelihood of your bottom 10% ever being your top performers is low. And we see a lot of leaders that really try to work with and turn these people around, which is great, but at a certain point, the best leaders are ones who can manage performance in a timely fashion and kind of be able to make the judgment call. Like, this person is never going to get here. So rather than spending time here, let's reallocate to developing our top performer. So I think enterprise leadership is both that kind of strategic leadership when it comes to the board and the ELT, but also I'm seeing more and more emphasis placed on, how well can this person build and develop a legal function and put a true succession plan in place.
Yeah, I actually just placed someone that starts in June. And when I did the references, by the way, obviously they want people on the executive leadership team, but they also want to talk to people that you led. And I spoke to the person who then was the successor and got the job. And a couple comments that came from them. One, first and foremost, she goes, I'm glad I didn't get the job until I did get the job. And because this GC number one taught them how to work with some pretty challenging people, how to respond to them, and how to turn those people around from being a challenge to being actually an asset, someone that's really, you know, changed their tune and had their back. The other comment she made was that whenever the GC put them in a stretch assignment and they came up with a great, their own idea of how to solve the issue, the GC always went out of their way to say to the executive team, this was so and so's idea. So didn't take the credit for it, even though they were, the executive leadership team was giving credit to the law department. She was very quick to say who was actually responsible. The reference went on to say, it made me always want to dig in deeper and do well for this GC because of that. So I thought those are two great points. One is teaching them how to have that same gravitas and be able to influence with others. And two, making sure that when they do come up with something unique, you're always giving where credit's due. I thought both those were great points.
Yeah. Well, one last thing I want to comment on before we move on to the next slide, just to further support this idea of, and I don't think this is necessarily a new concept, but it's showing up more and more in the data, that organizations are really putting a premium on and valuing general counsel who can bring that enterprise mindset and not just be an excellent attorney or legal practitioner. We just completed a research piece where we surveyed CHROs and looked at general counsel and the effectiveness of GCs through the CHRO's lens. And really, what came through there is, again, that increasingly organizations are viewing the GC role as this true enterprise leadership role and not simply the top legal expert in the organization. And one of the most interesting findings in that research was that CHROs identified lack of business acumen or lack of enterprise mindset as the primary limitation to GC effectiveness. It had nothing to do with legal capability. Well, when they don't have that strategic business mind and commercially mindfulness, they're perceived as being less effective.
Someone's asking a question. There's a lot of questions here, so I can't answer all here. But are there specific talents that drive value higher? And I think we just laid it out. So executive presence and ability to what you say and how you deliver it. There's just some people that just naturally walk into a room and everyone's like, "Whoa, who's that?" That's what you're looking for. So again. Sometimes it's tough advice to get from a peer. Um, and that's something that you go out and hire a coach or someone that just could be very genuine with you and very honest with you. That the good news is that's something anybody can easily make a change in for the better and be able to correct action on that.
Yeah. I think that's a good segue into the next slide, right? So we talked about, okay, here are the leadership qualities and capabilities that get you into the top seat and get you making the most money because organizations are placing a premium on that enterprise leadership. But then the challenge, of course, is, and John and I see this every day in our jobs, there are many highly accomplished, impressive attorneys out there who just struggle to communicate these broader leadership capabilities effectively during an interview. Like, how do you show that you have gravitas and you have executive presence and that you have a strategic mindset? So we spend a lot of time, coaching candidates on how to show up, what to say, what not to say. On this slide, these are some of the more practical tips and pointers around, don't over answer, create dialogue, maintain where you're doing 50% of the talking, they're doing 50% of the talking. Talk in terms of business impact, be concise, right? Um, but I think maybe the more interesting conversation, and John, I'd love your thoughts on this. You coach candidates on this constantly, is like, what does it mean to have gravitas, and how are companies evaluating and assessing for gravitas and emotional intelligence? And I love, I've heard before gravitas being described as, or really, it comes down to followership and trust. So, like,
Yeah.
what does followership and trust mean in terms of gravitas, and how do you show that in an interview?
Yeah, I think it's again how you carry yourself, and it's a balance of one you're talking about not over talking, but it's a balance of obviously saying things that make you that position you well look good without coming across like you're not a humble person. And I find that humility is like one of the biggest indicators right now of gravitas. People that have confidence and can speak just tell stories, right? Tell the story the way you know it. So it doesn't sound like you're making something up on the fly or that you have it memorized and rehearsed. It needs to be something that just really comes from your heart. It's just how you deliver that message that people want to listen to you. So how do I define gravitas? I find it to be someone that can clearly speak about what their accomplishments have been, and at the same time, not coming across where they're not genuine or that they don't have the humility that everyone's looking for. One of my tips is always when you're asked what are your greatest strengths, or where do you bring the business the most value? Again, I find that to be pretty much the same question. If you're ever asked that question, what are your greatest strengths? It shouldn't be, I think I do this. It really needs to be, where do you bring the business the most value? And it doesn't, I don't like it when it comes from what you think you bring the business the most value, but what have people told you? So a very genuine approach is to say, well, one of the things that my CEO has regularly told me is I do this. And again, it should be how you are able to serve as that strategic partner. One person we had on an interview lately, their proudest accomplishment was the team that they built. And I get that. I mean, obviously that's something to be very proud of. But I think it really needs to lead off with how you help the business achieve its goals, like how the business has succeeded under your leadership. And then maybe a follow-up second to that would be, I'm very proud of my team and the reputation that my team has. But focus more on your reputation, not what you think, but what have others shared with you. It goes a long way. It's a great way to position your accomplishments or your strengths without coming across that, you're not a humble person.
Yeah, I think being able to show humility is huge. And, humility is a key characteristic of high emotional intelligence. So is listening. And I
Yeah.
think, people can talk their way out of these roles sometimes where it becomes more of this monologue and they're not striking that 50-50 dialogue balance. And, part of that is, I think effective leaders do more listening, but they ask really smart strategic questions. And I think that's a great interview technique. Like, have
Yeah.
more thoughtful questions prepared than just this monologue of here's all the things I'm going to say about myself.
Yeah.
Those interviews never end well. People
I'll
talk too
just
much.
jump in. You can't ask questions like you're interviewing the interviewer. But I was sitting. I love to tell these stories. A CEO required me to sit on the interviews for the general counsel position, so I sat next to the CEO, and I prepped all the candidates to ask this question. I said, you know, two-part question. One is, where do you really need your GC to come in and hit the ground running? And two, what do I need to have achieved after the first year so that you feel you made the best hire possible? CEO answered and gave the most thoughtful answer I have ever heard. And I was like, wow, that's great. That he just laid out. I call it getting the answers to the test before you take it. They tell you everything you need to be the right candidate. And two of my five candidates came in and the CEO gave that thoughtful answer and they both said, okay, thank you. I'm like, well, when the CEO tells you what they're looking for, whoever you're interviewing, or being interviewed by, you need to come and say, okay, this is why I feel I'm the right fit. This is what I've been able to accomplish in my roles. So that it's you hit the nail on the head with here's what makes me the right candidate, and this is what I've been able to accomplish. So I think really understanding what's on the mind of everyone you're meeting with. Each person, maybe the CHRO has a different idea than the CEO or the CFO. They all need something different from the GC. So I say, don't be afraid to ask that question to everyone you meet with and get the answer. So you get the answers to the test, and then you hit the nail right on the head with, here's what I've been able to do.
Yeah. I think going back to the idea of gravitas really coming down to followership and trust. I've heard a lot from clients recently when we're talking about gravitas and just strong legal leaders, about, the person's ability to influence and the ability to influence, without authority. And what I mean by that
Yeah.
is, you know, it's more than, well, people listen to me because I have the title and I'm the general counsel and I said we can't do this or we can't do this or we should do this. But the bigger question I'm seeing organizations evaluating is, would people still seek out this person's judgment and trust their leadership if they didn't have the title? So being able to give clear, crisp examples of how you've been able to influence or how you've been able to build consensus across a group of diverse stakeholders and like what went into that. And I mean, a lot of it comes down to, having the trust and the rapport and the relationships and establishing yourself in the organization when you come in through listening and asking the right questions and building cross-functional relationships. So like when the time comes, people just trust you. They have the relationship, they have the rapport. But thinking about, your ability to influence, not just because you have this title, but because people trust you, they listen to you. Um, but yeah, in influence without formal authority is a theme that I've seen come up in interviews lately with clients, and they want concrete examples of your ability to uh, influence and drive consensus within an organization.
Yeah. Um, One thing, we're getting a lot of questions about the market and maybe that some of the jobs that they're looking at aren't paying what it would take to get them to leave. And I see this a lot of times where you have a very high position, not the general counsel, but a highly positioned lawyer at a public company, and you want to make a move, but you're kind of it's golden handcuffs. I mean, you're in there because you have a big unvested equity component, and your annual cash comp is more than private equity is looking to pay. So as I talk about the market right now, the larger public companies, they really do want that firsthand experience where you've been a general counsel, a sitting general counsel, and you're not coming in for the first time. I'm not saying that's all the time. I'm saying that's preferred from a candidate base, or they're looking at promoting internally in their own organization. The private equity companies are out very busy, very acquisitive. We're seeing a lot of work right now through acquisitions where they're coming to us over and over again. We have another portco, we have another portco, we have another portco, and we're looking for the general counsel. But the cash component for base and bonus for a PE portco could be a little bit lighter than you're looking for, and the money's made on the back end 3 to 5 years when the transaction occurs. A lot of it is just you have to understand what you're walking into. Um, I had a candidate or someone that I had placed years back. I placed her out of a Fortune 100 into a Fortune 100, and after she left, the company made her whole. They bought out the $1 million in equity that she had invested, and suddenly the company she went to, a technology company, the stock price dropped quite a bit. We saw techs down a few years back where they were down quite a bit, and the company she left was migrating forward. And I always watched this person because I'm like, every time I saw the equity of the company I placed her, I always kind of felt, gosh, I wonder what she's thinking, that she shoulda, coulda, woulda possibly stayed back. Well, now we're seeing all this AI related tech, that the chip stocks and all these stocks that are booming. And now the equity today, I just looked at it, is 10x what it was the day she signed on. So now the $1 million in equity, not to mention the fact that all those years the stock was depressed, she's getting more shares of that stock than she would have if the shares were higher. So now it's like a boomerang where the equity's through the roof. So I think a lot of it is I mean, you hear these stories now. I don't know how much this person's worth, say $20 million in equity, or probably more than that. But the reason that it happened is she believed in the company, she believed in the leadership team, she stuck it out, and now she's reaping the benefits. So sometimes it's not the easiest, but you have to stick it out. And one of the things we do see a lot is people that they don't believe that, all of a sudden, as soon as they see the tide turn with the company a little bit, the time to leave. And I mean, sometimes that is a really great bonus for you is when the company stock is depressed, but you believe in the leadership team and the mission of the company, and suddenly you get that boomerang effect at the right time and you're in a good situation. So, I mean, I would just say this, people out there contemplating, I want to become a first-time GC, there sometimes can be a buy-in where you have to take a little bit of a step back for a potential step forward. So, you just have to come to grips with that. If you believe in the people, you're the right chemistry fit, it's the right culture, you believe in the ultimate product and the market strategy, you sometimes have to take some chances to get ahead. And the people that I have been seeing take chances, they're really hitting it. And we're proud to be a part of that, but it can be a bit gut wrenching. I mean, it's not always you make a move to Nvidia just as the stock's going to go up 1,000%. You know, there's some luck involved, but a lot of it is doing the right research and making sure that it's the right fit. And in the long road, um, you're going to be rewarded for that.
Yeah, there's a question that came in, John, kind of on that topic about, how do you move into the GC seat for the first time if you've never been a GC, or how do you move into a public company GC seat, maybe if you're a sitting GC but you don't have public company GC
Yeah.
experience. And some people that's a real limiting factor. Other people have somehow been able to successfully pass through those thresholds and like what how do some people do that versus others? And I mean, I've heard this be referred to as kind of the broken rung on the career ladder. Like, how do you get to the GCC if you haven't been a GC yet? And I mean, that's the reality. We see a lot of our clients who want somebody who's been there, done that, and has proven success in the seat. But I think there are, the deputies that we see promoted to GCs for the first time, or
Mhm.
people who move into public GC seats. There's a few maybe themes or consistencies that I see. I mean, one, moving from deputy to general counsel, even if you haven't been in the top seat before, having exposure at the enterprise level is really important, and having been in the boardroom and being board facing. So how do you get that if you don't have that today? I mean, I think you have to be, your own advocate, and
Yeah.
hopefully you have a general counsel who takes succession planning and development seriously. But sometimes I think it requires you of raising your hand and volunteering and showing that initiative and making your career goals well known to your general counsel, and doing what you can through leading initiatives, or attending board meetings and just getting more enterprise exposure and visibility. um, I see, how do you get into a public company GC seat for the first time? Sometimes I think you have to play the long game and take a less, non-linear path. So I've placed, public company deputies in private equity GC roles. And, there's a possibility, and I've seen this happen, where the private equity company goes public, and then you have gone through, the IPO and the pre-IPO and the readiness process. And now at the end of it, you have public company experience. So I think thinking of different paths to get there, like just because you are a public company attorney, and number two, maybe taking a private that might go public type of role next, versus focusing exclusively on the public company GC seats. I think those can be particularly challenging to move into if you don't have sitting GC experience. But John,
Yeah.
what other practical
Well,
tips
you
do you
gave
have
you
for how to
gave
get there?
you gave a slew of opportunities. One is helping, uh, putting yourself in a position to be the internal successor and get there, that getting that board exposure. A lot of it is baby steps. And here's an interesting thing that I was just thinking about is general counsel with low risk tolerance make lousy general counsel. Usually the business is always annoyed by that. And general counsel candidates who don't want to take risk because they don't have high risk tolerance probably shouldn't be a general counsel anyway. So, I mean, it takes building up your risk tolerance so that you're going to take some chances. If you look at most of the successful people, they had to take a chance somewhere along the line. So I call it baby steps. Maybe it's not as big, like you're talking, not as big of an organization as you wanted, but once you get the title and you're there steering that corporate function, once you do it for a company that's $1 billion, next thing you know, it's easy to do it for a company that's 5 billion, and then it's easy to do it for a company that's 20 billion. So,
Mhm.
you really have to take that stepped approach. But a lot of it is coming to grips with you're going to have to take some risks. Just had a couple turndowns because people were afraid of taking risk of leaving their unvested equity for this company, this newer company's equity, and they didn't want to take that risk. I mean, I get it, but at the same time, if they took that risk and the company does what their mission was, which was a 10x in 3 to 5 years, um, there's an opportunity to go where your company would never go. So, I mean, a lot of it is really just coming to grips with your risk tolerance and knowing that if you can't accept risk, you're not going to be a great GC, so you probably shouldn't be one anyway. So, but taking the baby steps, putting yourself in a position, I think Brittany made it, being deliberate about it, where you're telling that having a harsh discussion or serious discussion with your GC. The GC feels you'll never have a chance of being the GC of the organization. They still do take pride in developing someone to go somewhere else. So, having at least a development plan where you can broaden your background and be that strategic advisor to the board or the leadership team, that'll make a big difference. One question I wanted to jump in here, and sorry to be bouncing around all over, but we're limited on time. We only have 20 minutes less 20 minutes. People are asking about AI and what you need to know about AI, or does AI influence the law department or becoming a general counsel? I'll just say this. It's definitely a question you will always be asked on an interview is what have you done so far to implement AI and how has it made an impact to your department? And coming in and saying I haven't done anything or I'm still in the research stage is an unacceptable answer. So I forgot we have a slide specifically about AI, but what I've been hearing from really great GCs is they're not looking to implement AI to reduce the size of the law department. They're looking to use AI to remove a lot of the repetitive work that can easily be done by AI and speed up the process so that the lawyers on their team can work on more strategic matters of whatever the case. But looking at it that if anything is a repetitive matter that's seen over and over again, there's AI out there. There's so many different avenues. I can't even recommend one because it's not every time I speak to someone, I hear about something different. But I would just say that if you're not implementing AI, and then there's two AIs. There's AI in the law department, and then there's AI as in from a compliance standpoint or regulatory standpoint, how is the rest of the company using AI? So there's two components to AI. What have you done to help improve efficiency with the law department? And two, how do you have you put together AI policy for the rest of the company itself?
Yeah, and I mean, I'm hearing from a lot of clients, that they want us to bake into our assessment what has this candidate done to modernize the legal function, and part of that is, of course, considering different technology solutions, including but not limited to AI. So I think, being able to participate in the conversation around how should we implement and incorporate AI into our legal strategy. That is an expectation
Yeah.
for general counsel in 26. But to John's point, it's about how AI is being used. And I think arguably we're seeing already that technical analysis can be generated perhaps more quickly through some of these AI tools. But even looking at this slide, right, of all of what is going to continue to differentiate legal leaders, judgment under ambiguity, enterprise leadership, communication, business fluency. These are things that AI is never going to be able to replicate. And I think it's very clear, based on the conversations that we're having in the market every day and even in the data, that organizations still need leaders who can create clarity and ambiguity and, where judgment and communication and enterprise leadership is needed. I mean, we're seeing companies place a greater premium on these characteristics now more than ever. AI is never going to replace that, but it's like, what are these kind of repetitive tasks that we can have AI take a look at to maybe increase throughput and efficiencies within the legal function, but also being able to have the judgment to know that, I need to recruit and develop really strong, talented, smart attorneys when judgment and navigating those gray areas is necessary. So I think there's an expectation that it's a combination of using AI where it makes sense to gain efficiencies, but also continuing to develop the people component of the legal teams and developing and helping to grow really good lawyers beneath you.
Yeah. We're running close to the edge, so I don't know if this is in one of the slides or not, but one of the things people are always asking us is how do they deal with negotiating comp? And the one thing supposedly it's illegal. Of course, this is what HR loves to ask right off the bat is what is your compensation? Now, if you're at a public company and you're a named executive officer. Obviously, that's already out there, so it's no big deal. One thing that I have trouble with is if you're a deputy general counsel looking to become a general counsel and they want to know exactly what you're earning, how much money can I, then make an offer that's comparable to where you are today. Just doesn't seem right either. So, I mean, as you're moving from a DGC to a GC. So I guess the conversation is this: when you're asked about what your compensation is, my personal advice is be candid. People don't want you to make things up or to basically say I'm not going to tell you. Kind of raises a flag. What are your thoughts about that, Brittney? I know it's a question a lot of people feel uncomfortable with.
It's a great question. And I mean, I think I tend to agree, John, that transparency and trust matter, especially in these executive level conversations. So I don't think I would um, encourage a somebody in this position to withhold that information. But at the same time, I don't think that the compensation discussion needs to be anchored around what that candidate is earning today. It should be
Yeah,
focused more about the scope and value of the new role.
yeah,
Because arguably, I mean, if you're moving from deputy GC to GC, you're taking on broader board exposure, you're leading larger teams, you're stepping into significantly more enterprise complexity. I mean, that warrants higher pay. And I don't think you should be evasive, but you do need to be a bit strategic. And, I think a good way of framing this as based on the scope of this role and the level of responsibility, here's how I would expect to be competitively positioned.
yeah,
Right. So speaking in terms of, based on my understanding of the market, what this role entails from a scope and complexity perspective, this is what I feel is competitive. They may still ask what you're earning today, but I wouldn't anchor or try to negotiate around that number. I would try to bring the focus to how do you value this role? Like, let's think about the scope and complexity relative to what I'm doing today. And, that should warrant an increase. And then I mean, then there's always like internal equity considerations too. So, saying something like I would want to be compensated fairly and equitably relative to my peers in the C-suite. That's
yeah,
something that companies are always very cognizant of, like not bringing somebody in who's going to throw off the internal equity and kind of acknowledging that, right? That I'm not looking to be paid above my peers, but I want to be paid equitably among my peers. And, based on where I think this role sits in the market, I would want to be here to feel like I'm being competitively and equitably compensated.
Yeah.
But yeah.
If you're working with a search consultant, we always know, I mean, one of our opening lines in our alignment meeting is what is the target compensation for this position? So we know. So if you're interviewing through one of us, me or my peers out there our peers in the industry, everyone should know what the target comp is. So you're going in. Keep in mind, like if sometimes people have visions that, I know they told me the comp is whatever number, $1 million in cash, but I think I'm worth a lot more than that. I'm going to go in there and negotiate something better. Again, like Brittany said, you need to make sure you're compensated like equally or competitively against the peers that you're working. See what is the CFO, what's the COO, what's the CHRO, what are they earning, and you want to be competitive from that standpoint. A lot of times, though, it's worth getting that title to become the general counsel. And maybe if you're a first-time general counsel, you might have to take a little bit of a hit, and then over the course of the next couple of years, as you prove yourself you become aligned with some of those higher paid executives who've been with the company much longer. My answer is always this, what are your compensation goals or expectations? I would just say, well, I've done my research. I know what companies like this should be paying their general counsel. If you make me a competitive offer, I'm sure I'll have no problem accepting it. So using that phrase, I'm looking for the most competitive offer, make me a competitive offer. That phrase keeps you out of trouble from saying a number too high and outpricing yourself or saying a number too low and shortchanging yourself. So use that phrase competitive offer. I do highly recommend like Brittany said, being candid, where you're laying out exactly this is where I'm coming from. If you have unvested equity, that's usually where we have the most room to negotiate is how they're going to deal with that. Um, but they're going to want a statement, so it's not like if you hold the information back, it's going to help or hurt you. They're going to ask for your company financial statement that shows what the unvested is and when the vesting periods are. What we try to do is obviously the goal is to be made completely whole. Most times though, you're getting the first year unvested and paid in full, the second year maybe 50% and possibly a third year. I mean, the expectation is you're making a change for equity that's on a faster growth pace and you're going to be receiving more of it, so that ultimately you're going to be in a better position. But yeah, the compensation negotiation is always a bit of a challenge. We try to position the people get the best offer possible. That said, I mean, companies have a target compensation and either you fit or you don't fit. I stop people from getting on planes and flying to go to an interview because their expectations are out of the line that they could be in. So nothing worse than going through the whole interview process and finding out their target compensation is well below what you'd be willing to accept.
Yeah. I saw a question come in about some states don't allow companies to ask you to disclose prior salary. Those laws are in place, yes, and even John and I and really any executive recruiter as a rule of thumb because the laws are constantly evolving by state. We never ask, "What are you making today?" I'll ask, what kind of compensation would you need to strongly consider an opportunity like this? I would say 9 out of 10 times, and especially at the deputy to GC level, candidates are pretty forthcoming with that and transparent. And it's easier, certainly, for us as the executive recruiter to have that transparency to understand so we can kind of help. Tell you, do we think this is in range and in the ballpark, and give some tips and pointers on, how you might want to approach this if you get to an offer stage. But it seems to come up in uh, most instances. So I wouldn't bank on, the company is not going to ask me because they're not allowed. I mean, there's kind of ways to ask the question, I suppose, in a roundabout way. But I mean, most clients do want an understanding of where the person is coming from, and they do factor that into um, where they're going to land on an offer, right or wrong. So, I mean, better just to be prepared with the reality that that question is going to be asked, and rather than be evasive, I think, again, being forthcoming and transparent, but just not anchoring the conversation around, this is the number I'm at, so this is where I need to be, but, speak in terms of what you know about the market and where you would want to be to feel that this is a competitive offer worth considering.
Yeah, we're still getting a lot of questions talking about that gravitas and ability to influence. I had a great situation yesterday where and this never happens. A client comes to me with a new GC spec, and this is what I'm looking for. Before I even get off the Zoom call, I get a candidate unsolicited, sends me a resume and goes, "Hey, I just went on the market," and I'm like, "What the heck? This is unbelievable!" Like, this publicly traded REIT client in New York. And I was like, what are the chances this happens? Because it never happens. So I meet the person. He was not a perfect fit. He wasn't a perfect fit. I thought he was a perfect fit, the resume, he missed a few compliance and regulatory aspects that the CEO was prioritizing. But the presentation was unbelievable. And the questions when I asked, what was the shape of the law department when you started? What is the shape of the law department today? How have your responsibilities progressed since you worked there? Just the energy, enthusiasm, and you could just feel the trust. Who would be serve as your references? Well, the CFO would definitely be one of my references. Just the way that questions were answered and it just blew me away. So I called the CEO. I go, "You won't believe this. I actually have someone I want you to meet just to kind of calibrate where we're at. And I know you won't make a hire with just one candidate, but at the same time, I'd love for you to just meet this person." And sure enough, because of those comments about leadership and the trust that they've earned and the references that they had and the energy and enthusiasm, we go, "Fine, I'll meet them. I'll meet them." So we had the interview scheduled. Maybe in my next newsletter, I'll have to say if that person got the job. But it was interesting that those things not on the resume, those components got that CEO so excited where if I didn't have the same enthusiasm toward the candidate because the presentation was lackluster, I probably would never have put him in front of the CEO. So it doesn't just matter getting the job, it matters getting to the table to allow you to show what you're made of. Because a lot of times, Brittany and I, just all of us in the business, we get this long laundry list of requirements for a position, and we always seem to work around it when you have this kind of, for me to make a pitch like that. So wholeheartedly just believe in someone and what they've been able to accomplish and what I think you're going to walk away when you meet the person. So just keep that in mind as far as how valuable that component of the business is. And I'm sure we're dealing with so many incredibly smart people that you can figure it out. You can figure out whatever the missing link is. So we're running out of time. We're going to go to just again, thank you, everyone. Avro, if we can just go to the last, but if we can go, thank you, everyone, again for participating. Be on the lookout for that paper, both the research that's already been put out with the board and the gap with the general counsel. But the next one I think is just fascinating. Brittany brought attention to it, but it's with the CHROs and what their observations are about the general counsel and what really differentiates one from the next. Really, really eye-opening. I thought the paper was fantastic. So thank you again for everyone attending. Thank you for your participation in our survey. And please let us know if we could ever be of assistance, whether you're looking for something new, someone looking for something new, you're looking to make a strategic hire, Or if you're looking for a coach, the coaches make a major difference with the soft skills that we're talking about that really brings the most value to your compensation. Well, have a good day, everyone, and we'll see you again
Thanks,
next.
everybody.